In the Pokemon TCG, Pokemon tools are a type of card that attaches to your Pokemon to provide some kind of effect to the Pokemon that they're attached to, but you can only have one tool attached to a Pokemon at a time. Tool cards have been around since some of the game's earliest sets, so there's a lot of bad cards to go over. And at number 10, we have Struggle Gloves. This card has the effect of boosting the attached Pokemon's attack damage by 30 if your opponent's active Pokemon has the same type as the attached Pokemon's weakness. For those who aren't aware, the type of weakness refers to the type the Pokemon is dealt double damage by. Charizard EX has a water type weakness, so if you attach Struggle Gloves to it, Charizard's attacks would do 30 more damage to water type Pokemon. Throughout the history of the game, tool cards that boost damage output have almost always seen some play, especially when the damage increase is as high as 30. Despite the precedent, Struggle Gloves struggles as a competitively viable card due to its effect of being far too situational to take advantage of reliably. To show how good that extra 30 damage can be, it's important to note that Vitality Band, which only increases damage by 10, has seen tournament play. Sometimes the difference between a one-hit KO or not is that 10 damage. This is even more so in the case when you increase the damage by 3 times that amount. Struggle Gloves is only ever capable of providing its damage boost under very specific circumstances. It's not often that your opponent plays the deck revolving around your Pokemon's type weakness. Even if that is the case, where you do match up against Pokemon that hit you for weakness, it's much better to play cards that remove your weakness. Otherwise, your opponent's Pokemon are more than likely able to KO yours much more efficiently. Cards like Weakness Policy have seen regular competitive play for this reason. Not only is Struggle Gloves far too situational to be reliable, it's also outclassed as a tech card against difficult matchups. And at number 9, we have Lum and Miracle Berry. These cards each have the effect of restoring any status condition affecting the attached Pokemon at the end of the turn, but they get discarded after. These cards are functionally identical, so we'll just be referring to Lum Berry only from now on. There's a good reason as to why these two cards have never been viable at tournaments. The major issue with these cards is, much like Struggle Gloves, they are far too narrow in their application to be used in most decks. Very few decks throughout the game's history have been reliant on status conditions. Most of the time, status conditions are incidental parts of effects, or more seen as an extra upside to an already strong card. They very rarely are what makes a card powerful on their own. Since status conditions are so rarely impactful, there's not much of a point to dedicating cards in your deck solely to beat them. Even against strategies that could occasionally leverage status conditions, like Eternatus VMAX decks playing Galarian Weezing, the status condition inflicted by Weezing wasn't what made the matchup good or bad. The second issue regarding Lum Berry is the amount of other cards that help combat status conditions. In terms of how good they are at restoring status conditions, the classic Switch card is better in a vast majority of cases, since status conditions are automatically removed from Pokemon once they're brought to the bench. Switch can act as a cure for status conditions in a pinch, while still having some use in matchups where the ability to cure status conditions isn't relevant. There are also cases where you might already have a different tool card attached to your Pokemon, leading to Lum Berry being useless. Like the previous card on this list, Lum Berry is just not consistently good enough to play in any serious competitive deck. And at number 8, we have Energy Link. This tool card lets you move any number of energy cards on a Pokemon with Energy Link attached to another Pokemon with Energy Link attached as often as you like during your turn. Effects that allow you to move energy around your Pokemon as much as you like are usually very limited. A card like Bronzong, for instance, can only move metal energy and requires you to evolve into in order to use its ability. So at the cost of 2 cards in your hand, since you need both energy links, you can move as much energy between 2 Pokemon as you like. Energy Switch, a card that lets you move one basic energy from one of your Pokemon to another, has seen play over the many years it's been legal in the standard format. With this in mind, Energy Link seems like it would at least have a niche in some decks during its time at standard. Regrettably, this just wasn't a home for this card. The format was dominated by attackers which required little energy such as Luxray G level X, and these strategies had no need to move around large amounts of energy. Even though Energy Link wasn't a great fit in the best decks of the format, that alone doesn't give it a spot on this list. The real issue with Energy Link is that it's outclassed as a card that lets you move around energy. The biggest problem with using Energy Link is that you need 2 cards in order to move energy around in the first place. If you were ever planning to move more than 1 energy card at a time, you were always better off just using Energy Switch as it only took a single card out of your hand. There's no reason to play 2 cards from your hand when a single card can have the same effect. Energy Link also has competition in the role of moving energy around outside of Energy Switch. Decks looking to use Regirock's Regicycle Pokepower to put an extra energy onto the board had access to Stark Mountain, a stadium card that lets you move a fire or fighting energy to one of your fire or fighting type Pokemon. Strategies built around the various Arceus cards got to play Ultimate Zone. A stadium lets you move energy from your Arceus cards to your other Arceus cards as much as you wanted. Almost every deck that would want a means to move energy around has better ways to do it than using Energy Link. And at number 7, we have a trio of cards, Berry, Oran Berry, and Sitrus Berry. Both Berry and Oran Berry have the effect to discard themselves and heal 20 damage from the Pokemon they're attached to if the Pokemon has 2 or more damage counters on it between turns. Whereas Sitrus Berry heals for 30 damage if the attached Pokemon has 3 or more damage counters on it. Tool cards generally fall into 2 different categories, aggressive or defensive tool cards. A more aggressive card would help modify your damage output proactively to help you take KOs when your Pokemon otherwise wouldn't have. A defensive tool card, like these berries, should help your Pokemon stay in the field long enough or provide another beneficial effect that dissuades your opponent from doing something. These 3 cards are all very bad defensive tool cards. Cards that heal your Pokemon have always been hit or miss in the Pokemon TCG since they either heal enough to prevent key knockouts, or they don't heal enough damage to be worthwhile running. This difference between preventing or not preventing KOs can be as close as 10 damage. Practically, this means you usually want to play the card that heals the most. This is why none of these 3 berries saw play initially, as they were outclassed by Gold Berry. Gold Berry has the same style of effect as the other 3 berries, except it heals 40 damage if the attached Pokemon has 4 or more damage counters on it. When Gold Berry released alongside Berry, it wholly eclipsed it in terms of playability, since healing an additional 30 damage made a huge difference in preventing KOs. Even though it was the highest healing berry card during its time in the standard format, Sitrus Berry still saw no play, partially due to restrictions placed on the card. The original Sitrus Berry could not attach to any Pokemon EX, which was unfortunate since they all had higher than usual HP stats and benefited greatly from extra survivability. Decks like Kingdra EX historically used Potion to keep the high HP EX Pokemon alive as long as possible, but sadly couldn't use Sitrus Berry. Oran Berry, which was legal alongside Sitrus Berry, could be used with Pokemon EX, but never was since it healed the same amount of damage as Potion. Sitrus Berry also received a reprint later in the game's history, although it hasn't seen any play in the current standard format. These 3 berries have simply never done enough to warrant their competitive usage. And at number 6, we have Scroll of the Fanged Dragon. This tool card gives the single strike Pokemon it's attached to the Super Strong Slash attack. For 1 fighting, 2 metal, and 2 colorless energy, Super Strong Slash deals 300 damage. It makes you discard all energies attached to the Pokemon that used it. Super Strong Slash is a really strange attack since it does a ton of damage, but also not enough. Most popular Pokemon VMAX actually survive the attack, with Mew VMAX barely holding out at 10 HP. Even Stage 2 Pokemon EX, like the meta-relevant Charizard EX, are also not KO'd by Super Strong Slash without additional modifiers. This isn't as big of a deal though, since single strike Pokemon usually have multiple single strike energy attached, which boosts the Pokemon's damage by 20 per copy of the card. An attack capable of one-shotting every Pokemon in the game is tempting, but it has a massive fatal flaw. Super Strong Slash requiring 5 energy cards is an enormous task to power up. Even though the single strike deck has Houndoom attach energy straight from the deck, you still have to attach the 2 required metal energies in another way. Houndoom's single strike roar ability only lets you attach a single strike energy, a card that can't fulfill the metal energy requirement. In variants of single strike decks using Lugia V-Star, the energy cost is a little easier to achieve. Thanks to Summoning Star letting you put 2 Archeops in your discard pile into play, you can use Archeops' Primal Turbo ability to attach up to 4 energy cards from your deck to Pokemon per turn. Despite the scroll being easier for those decks to use, it's never seen competitive success due to how overkill Super Strong Slash is. Since single strike energy already boosts the damage of the attached Pokemon, Lugia V-Star decks have no issue taking one-hit KOs with the usual attacks of single strike Pokemon. With 3 single strike energies attached, Tyranitar V's single strike Crush attack deals 300 damage without needing to accommodate an absurd energy cost and a tool card attachment. There's just no point in building your deck to use Scroll of the Fanged Dragon when you can deal 300 or more damage in a far easier and less convoluted way. And at number 5, we have Counterattack Claws. When a Pokemon this card is attached to takes damage, you flip a coin. If heads, you put 2 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon and then discard Counterattack Claws. During the time this card was released, Pokemon had far lower HP. So the 2 damage counters could actually be a serious difference maker when it comes to taking KOs. Unfortunately, this card has 3 major issues that stopped it from seeing any competitive usage. Firstly, and the most glaring issue of all, the damage dealt by Counterattack Claws requires you to win a coin flip. This coin flip meant that the tool card would do nothing half the time. While you would still have a tool card attached after you didn't win the coin flip, this 50-50 meant that your card could be completely useless in key moments where you need those 2 damage counters. Also, if your opponent was afraid of attacking into a tool card with a low HP Pokemon, they could simply use a different attacker. The second downside was having to discard Counterattack Claws once you actually got to damage your opponent's Pokemon. Notably, every tool card at the time would discard itself after they used it, so this wasn't that big of an issue then. When compared to modern tool cards though, Counterattack Claws is completely outclassed by Rocky Helmet, which puts 2 damage counters the Pokemon that damages the attached Pokemon guaranteed and doesn't discard itself. Rocky Helmet also has seen very little competitive play, which doesn't paint a good image for Counterattack Claws' strength. Counterattack Claws also had heavy competition for the 2 best tool cards at the time, Focus Band and the previously mentioned Lum Berry. Focus Band also had a coin flip effect, but had a significantly higher payoff compared to Counterattack Claws. When the Pokemon with Focus Band would be KO'd, you got to flip a coin. If heads, the Pokemon remained at 10 HP and the tool card was discarded. For the most part, if you have to choose between a tool card that deals more damage or keeping your Pokemon alive on a coin flip, the latter is much more appealing. For being far too easy to play around for an unreliable payoff, Counterattack Claws gets this spot on the list. And at number 4, we have Star Piece. This tool has the effect to evolve the bench Pokemon it's attached to with its next stage from your deck if that Pokemon is on your bench and has 2 or more damage counters on it. Star Piece has an interesting effect on paper, but is far too impractical to use reliably or consider it over any other options. Many of the cards released during the e-reader era were intentionally made to be weaker to rein in power creep. There are some strengths to the card though. Compared to Professor Elm's training method, being able to search out an evolution card from your deck without having to use your once per turn supporter is a legitimate upside, but it doesn't make up for the many downsides of using Star Piece. The main issue with the card itself is that the attached Pokemon has to be on your bench. If Star Piece worked when attached to your active Pokemon, the Pokemon would be far more likely to take damage from an attack and getting the required 2 damage counters to use the effect. If you're trying to evolve to a stage 2 Pokemon, this will let you get them out a turn earlier since you can immediately evolve the Pokemon again during your turn after the Star Piece effect wore off. Unfortunately, since the card effect only works when it's on a bench Pokemon, you have to switch the damaged Pokemon out of the active spot on your turn. For a card trying to boost the consistency of your deck by setting up evolutions, this is a few too many hoops to jump through for very little upside. It didn't help that the format Star Piece was legal for were fairly slow. The slow nature of the format meant it was okay to take a few extra turns to set up your supporter cards like Professor Elm's training method, or other cards that can draw into your evolution lines. All in all, Star Piece is a unique card design, but unique doesn't make a card good. And at number 3, we have Billowing Smoke. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out, all prize cards your opponent would take from the KO are discarded instead. Much like the previous card, Billowing Smoke's effect is more unique than it is competitively viable. You would much rather play cards that prevent your Pokemon from being knocked out, rather than play a card which prevents your opponent from putting prize cards into their hand. Even though your opponent doesn't get any extra cards to the KO, they still get closer to winning the game, and you've still lost a Pokemon that was likely important. It doesn't help that the cards your opponent takes for the prize cards aren't usually the difference maker in whether or not you lose the game. If you want to prevent your opponent from getting cards from knockouts, just stop them from taking knockouts using better cards. In second place for worst tool card of all time, we have Magma Pointer and Aqua Diffuser. These 2 cards grant attacks to the Team Magma and Team Aqua cards that they're attached to respectively. Magma Pointer lets the Team Magma Pokemon use the Magma Pointer attack, which costs 1 fight energy to deal 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Aqua Diffuser lets you use the Aqua Diffuser attack. For 1 water energy, Aqua Diffuser confuses and poisons your opponent's active Pokemon. The thing that puts Scroll of the Fanged Dragon on this list is that it was too difficult to enable despite its decent payoff. These 2 tool cards are the exact opposite. They are very easy to set up, but are genuinely awful attacks to use. When you compare Magma Pointer attacks to strong attacks that can be used for 1 fight energy, the difference in power level is painfully obvious. Landross's EX's Hammer attack deals 30 damage to the active and one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for a single energy. Magma Pointer does less damage to a single target and requires you to attach a tool card to a specific subtype of Pokemon to be used. For a card printed in 2015, Magma Pointer is a laughably bad attack. Aqua Diffuser is no different. Attacks like Aqua Diffuser that inflict status conditions are very rarely ever used in competitive settings. If a Pokemon with this kind of attack has been played, it was likely used for other upsides, with the status condition attack being a last resort if you had absolutely nothing else to do. This is not the kind of attack that makes you want to play a tool card in order to have access to. These cards were part of the Double Crisis set, a set that acted more as a collection of themed promo cards rather than anything intended to be used seriously. Both of these tool cards were meant as callbacks to the first attacks of the original Team Magma's Groudon and Team Aqua's Kyogre. These 2 Pokemon tool cards are great callbacks to iconic cards of the past, but fail completely as competitively viable cards. And round out the list at number 1, the worst Pokemon tool card is Healing Scarf. This tool card has the effect of healing 20 damage from the Pokemon it's attached to whenever you attach an energy card from your hand to that Pokemon. Since you can normally attach 1 energy card to your Pokemon per turn, Healing Scarf will only heal 20 damage every turn. For reference, that means you'll need to use 2 cards from your hand to heal less damage than what a single potion can. By the time Healing Scarf was printed, Potion hadn't seen any tournament success in years, and still doesn't to this day. While there are decks that can use abilities to attach multiple energies from your hand to the Pokemon each turn, like with the Blastoise's Deluge ability, these decks would much rather play tool cards like Muscle Band to boost damage, or Float Stone for free retreat costs. To add insult to injury, Healing Scarf was printed in the Roaring Skies expansion pack, a set that has some of the best cards in the game's history. In most strategies, Healing Scarf is worse than an already bad card. Even the decks that could take advantage of its effect, they'd rather just play other tool cards. Although it's pretty funny that the worst Pokemon tool card of all time was printed in one of the best sets of all time. Alright, and that's the video. A lot of bad tool cards have been printed over the long history of the game. Let us know if you think we missed any, and also any ideas for future videos just like this one.